Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, where we explore the world of professional services consulting. Hosted by Dean McMann and Anthony Paluska, each episode delivers expert insights, real-world stories, and interviews with top consultants to help you refine your consulting skills.
Thanks for joining us today. We've got a very exciting program today with Tristan Humbles, global head of PS for Natterbox. And Tristan, tell us a little bit about your background and then what you'd like to talk about today. It's an exciting topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Dean. Background, I have about 8 years of experience leading projects directly within the telecom, technology, and pharma spaces, with most noticeably the last 3 to 4 years leading project teams directly all over the globe, specifically within EMEA, APAC, and then the North America region.
Great. Help us a little bit. Just dive into the types of projects that you're working on. You mentioned the industries, but a little bit more detail on the length, duration, complexity, specific topics would be helpful.
Yeah, so let's start now, and then we'll kind of go in the past a little bit here. So Natterbox is kind of focused in that SaaS space, specifically within the telco markets, right? So it's implementations to deliver the offering within the Salesforce instance. So it's going to be working with clients directly to implement the Natterbox offering for them. Prior to that one, when I was working at AbbVie directly, I was about a 6 to an 8 month contract there, working directly out of the strategy management office. Within that office, working on projects tied to urgent safety measures, unanticipated problems, and clinical events. And then prior to AbbVie, when I was also working in the technology space over at Motorola, working on projects tied to SharePoint deployments, working on ripping out the existing monitoring platforms and then bringing in a brand new one. So it's been kind of a predominantly within that tech space, but within the strategy management office over at AbbVie too.
Yep, great. Thanks. Yeah, I think that background and context will be helpful as we go through this. But so 8 years of experience, spending time in a very similar industry, working on a similar topic, although I'm sure as the topic has evolved, the market and our clients have evolved as well. What are some of the key themes or trends that you've seen recently emerging in your space?
Yeah, so great question. And it's interesting. So it's one that we're seeing, I would say it's been emerging more so over the last 2 years. And we're seeing a kind of a gradual transition more and more. One is going to be an increased need for risk management. Now, the increased need for risk management has also kind of shifted the deal process, the cycle, and kind of how you have to flow throughout the implementations also to the post process. So the reason one, there are a variety of reasons, but really kind of boils down to micro and macroeconomics that are impacting kind of how companies are buying. Right. So you're going to see an increased need of a COO or an executive presence involved as a sponsor, whereas in the past it may have been a director or a VP. Now with that comes the process of needing to ensure that continuity is straight and concrete throughout, right? So that there's clear alignment, that that the client requirements have been translated from the sales teams or the revenue teams, from how the lead is coming in to how it's flowing through, going through to PS or the implementation teams, and then all the way to the handover process where the CSMs or support then may playing a active role. So it's one, aligning on a clear message, right? What is that message? Keeping it consistent throughout. 2, building a strong relationship, building strong bonds, letting the client know, 1, you are safe with me. We're going to take you through this journey together. We're going to be able to dig into and then create your technical vision. Okay, so it's also minimizing the odds of adverse events popping up. Okay, so how do you do that? It's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of building up the client's eyes of you being a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert. But you, 1, need to take the journey with them, and then 2, focus on building that relationship throughout.
Tristan, that was a lot of good information. Let's unpack that a little bit. And I want to go all the way back to executives are more involved.
Yes.
So when we see that, and this is a question, it forces us to be more content oriented, more consultative through the whole process. Does that mean in y'all's case, PS is brought up to the beginning, or does that mean we're changing our revenue teams?
It's an excellent question. So it can be a hybrid of both. Okay. One, you may embed the PS teams directly within that sales process, right? The cycles are longer, so you may embed them kind of as that subject matter expert, more so than you would a sales engineer or a technical consultant kind of on that front end. Or what we've done here at like Natterbox 2 is you embed them in the scoping process. Although you may not be directly communicating with the executives directly, you're communicating with all those revenue teams that are speaking with them. Okay, so you are kind of being that technical filter of what is and what is not possible to ensure that the expectations that the client has, they're never caught off guard at any point of the individual chain. Okay, so you can either be embedded on that front end or be kind of in that background supporting the revenue teams until it's passed over to the implementation directly.
And which one do you personally prefer?
Depends on the client, but if you want to minimize risk to its fullest, front end. Get embedded, meet the sponsors directly, form that relationship up front, and then it's going to be the same voice, the same face. It really ensures no requirements are ever lost, right? You've always been clear, but then you kind of have that same presence, and then it allows you to keep building on that throughout the implementation. What a lot of people don't want to talk about too, right? With any project, you can minimize risk as much as you possibly want. The real reality is it still always exists and may happen. So you can either be at a spot where you are going to be putting out a fire, which we all hope never happens, putting out a fire when the relationship was never established, or doing it when you have camaraderie or a bond with the stakeholder that you're actively dealing with. So if you're going to do it on that front end to minimize risk, but it's not absolutely required.
Yeah, how do you balance this desire to manage and minimize risk with the billability of your team and making sure that we have a professional services group that is delivering on and generating revenue for us, not just participating on the front end of a sales cycle? How do you balance that?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question, right? Whenever you're focusing on building the relationship throughout, right? It's the billable percents are going to naturally be higher. You're naturally going to be conducting more meetings with a client directly, right? But in most cases, clients don't necessarily always want to pay for that extra time. So one is being strategic on your approach, on when you're meeting, but also establishing the why on why you're doing it. So it has to be a clear cadence throughout to be able to proactively plan what your billable is going to look like throughout that journey, but also being clear and upfront with the client on how needs may change your various constraints, okay? Whether it is the constraint of cost, as you're mentioning here, right? So the billable numbers, keeping the people's numbers higher, whether it's a change in scope, whether it's a change in value, there's various constraints that will impact the project. What I've noticed, if you're clear with the client at all parts of it, those conversations are naturally easier, but also do the best by the client's, needs. Be strategic in your discussions, be strategic on when you're placing them and when you're actually having those client meetings.
Yeah, so you're describing PS playing this huge role throughout the customer life cycle and that entire arc, and that's and we believe very strongly, right? Somebody has to be in that role and serving as that guide throughout that entire client life cycle to maximize the value and the outcomes and the long-term relationship there. And PS is a logical function to do some of that kind of stuff. But there's also other functions in the organizations that, depending on where people are, may perceive that they have that role. So right, you've got the sales and account management organization, the customer success team. There's managed services that participate in that. I want your perspective on kind of the pros and cons of different functions owning that. But for a second, take us a step back and can you walk through the structure of your organization respective to some of those key functions and what exists, what doesn't exist, and what are the expectations that the professional services team operates with each of those groups?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really kind of broken up into a sales and then kind of a post-sales type of company, right? So with a revenue focus, the later half kind of focusing on that churn management, the upsell, the white space area, and then PS is conveniently placed right in like the middle of it. So if we're going to go to the revenue teams, right? It's like most companies would in that SaaS space. We have our marketers, we have our BDRs, our AEs, our alliance managers. Everybody's goal is going to be a little bit different, right? So alliance is going to be to build a relationship, to be able to generate leads, marketing, content, lead gen, BDRs, following up. But then the AEs are kind of really there to sell, okay? Now, they do have some support with our SEs. So it's the revenue is going to be kind of that leg like there. The back end, and I'm going to tie it together where, PS is, the back end is going to be the CSMs, the support. So as previously mentioned, guiding the customer, continuing on the relationship, focusing on the white space opportunities, and then PS is right in the middle WAM. Okay, so we focus on specifically to implement for our customers. That is our core function. Okay, so deals sold, it comes through, we deliver. We deliver what their technical vision is, make it become a reality, and then it's passed over. And now in some orgs, that's maybe where it ends. Now within mine, it's very so blended, right? So PS on the revenue side gets involved with the scoping process, or as we talked about earlier, kind of acting as that consultant throughout, right? So it's the deal's going to shift it, but we get involved in scoping, requirement gathering, saying what we can or like what we can't do, deploying, and then when it gets passed over to the post end with our teams there, so the CSMs mentioned, plus the support teams, it's also getting re-embedded, re-involved when it makes sense. So it's not, we don't necessarily have a managed service per se, but we have kind of a makeshift one that we do right by our customers. And just by saying that shows you that kind of we're always trying to go above and beyond for them. So if a customer success manager has a client trying to focus on a white space, maybe getting stuck in consulting with them, telling me like client what we can or what we can't do, doing on-sites, doing some health checks. So really we are in that middle ground, but we are spread across depending on what the needs or what the demand are from my team's specialization in overall knowledge.
Yeah. And just a quick question kind of tactically on how that operates, especially on the post-sales side of things. So the CSMs are involved in that. Is there a defined escalation path with, right, your level 1, level 2, level 3, like a support would be, where we have to bring back in the professional services team that's at a certain level, or it's a predefined, this problem has reached this level of complexity that not only do I need to bring in the professional services team, I might need to bring in the professional services resource that actually worked on this particular engagement. How did the CSMs in that case draw the appropriate line so they bring you in when it's needed, and also not go too far down trying to solve a problem that your team could very quickly and easily jump in and solve?
And are you going to get paid?
So that is an excellent question. I think that you kind of answered it in 7 different ways, because we do kind of set similar.
We can ask a question and make our questions last 15 minutes. Don't let that bother you.
So that was, so it's one, nobody knows the client better than the CSM should after the handover, right? They are there to be stuck in throughout, having the conversations, getting to know the people's families, right? So this CSM should know more than anybody about the client. So they're kind of that first point in assessment. If the CSM or the customer success manager doesn't know kind of where the problem lies or kind of the best path, they will likely loop in our support manager first. Okay. And if it's beyond kind of that technical scope or capabilities of that team, they will then come to me or come to one of the like regional leads. Okay. So for us, assessment on, can we fit it into capacity? Can your team work on it? We'll evaluate it, and then we will make a decision based on what makes the most sense. Well, whether it's a spin-off of a project, whether it's a one-off meeting with the client directly. We have an offering where a customer will actually pay for my team's time. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's an assessment first by the CSM, followed by support, and then to my team to make the ultimate determination on how is it going to be handled and then actively managed.
We did some interviews of trends, and that's what we're talking about with you today. One of the trends, and I wonder if y'all see it, that we heard a lot about was the increased responsibility and value of PS as our client base matures. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not getting thousands of new clients. We're going to drive more revenue in the clients we have and across. Is that are y'all experiencing that?
We are in a certain way. So it's getting more involved. The more tied in that PS is, so it's like mentioned by you, so getting sucked in further and further throughout the customer journey and the life cycle, we are seeing that as a trend, right? We are in conversations with clients longer, more so within the last 12 months than we typically would have been for like the prior 5 years, right? So these conversation lengths that professional services is going to be involved in is going to be getting longer and longer and longer. Why that is, right? So what I'm seeing is it's peeling back to that risk management point. The client now versus maybe in the past where you would have gone through an implementation, gone through a deployment, whatever it is. They would have a predefined thing, and I think it comes to their level to accept risk. But prior, they would go through a project. They would know definitively from the scope, okay, by this point, I'm going to be passed over to this party. And people just lived with it, right? But as things just kind of naturally around in companies become tighter and tighter, they need to be able to see ROI faster. They need to be able to have their issues resolved sooner. So naturally, it's not going to be for those post-support teams that are not as consultative as PS would be, right? PS is going to be that golden star, that golden path to be able to show them how to get as much value possible. So clients want to retain on and hold on to that piece. They want to be able to hold on to the teams that they know, one, can answer the most complex questions without having to bounce around and raise cases and then go here. They want the answers sooner, and they want to be able to see value longer, or if they don't have it, be able to talk with the people that can demonstrate it or bring it forth to them. So it's a very complex reason as to why it's happening. There's not a clean answer to it.
Yeah. But I think that's going to continue. But I do love PS is the golden path.
That's right.
I think we might name our entire series PS is the golden path.
How effective have you been at monetizing that shift in the customer's desire to have more of the experts with them longer in the journey?
So an excellent question, and one that I think is still being worked through, if I'm being honest. We're always trying to figure out ways to, one, how do you get the most out of your customers, but most out of a customer in a way where value is being provided. Now, on that same token, right, so we're still supplying an offering, so it makes it more challenging. And this is going to be a constant theme is everybody is trying to reduce churn. Everybody wants to reduce churn. And if the make or break point is always maybe giving something to a client for free, companies are now exploring that more now than ever. We're experiencing the same thing over at McMann. It's how do we offer the most to clients, but also ensure that at the end of those contract terms, that they are as happy as possible, willing to renew for a 36 monthly term. So it's monetizing it has not been a easy answer, but it's one that's constantly being explored on how do we give the clients the most possible to then be able to get something back from it.
Yeah, grabbing that extra cost, whether it's revenue or not, becomes really important in companies figuring out their COGS, figuring out what it really costs to have. And we see that for the most part, this becomes the black box they don't really see. And then it either comes up on, your utilization or profitability, and you may be proactively telling them. I just mean from a traditional accounting point of view, it's a little opaque, and that makes it difficult.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
As the industry becomes, our customers and clients become, I want this faster, I want a better outcome. Primarily, we hear because we're just tired of buying software. There's so many things, so many niche, there was hey, we bought giant software, right? Now we're buying, if you will, tiny software all the time. So what else do you see us doing as PS to, work with that big transition?
I think that we're going to have to start deploying quicker, right? So be able to get a client or a customer live as fast as possible. We're also seeing a gradual shift on whether we do a POC or a pilot, right? So POC, giving a client access to it, building out a quick kind of configuration for them, testing it out, seeing it, buying. But now we're seeing a massive shift too on pilots, right? So terms of getting them live and using it and then making decisions maybe 2 weeks after that. Now that inherently, if your organization is going that route, has revenue risks, right? Because you're spending time, you're spending billable to deploy a client that may not actually turn into an actual contract, a real life thing. But what we're going to see more and more and more is getting clients live as fast as possible. The days of a constant, whether you were doing a 6-month deployment or a 2-year deployment, I think is starting to fade away more and more and more and more and more. You're going to start seeing these clients moving to MVPs more so often, going live in whether it's 2 months or 3 months versus a year project. And we're going to see the shift in timelines reduce further and further and further, and building things out in an iterative process.
I think the iterative process is going to end up being the answer, because the very time we're implementing, their workforce is also changing to a totally different dynamic of people in their early 20s, and therefore their experience level of adapting to change is different. So that just puts a lot of pressure on the tech partner and then the PS organization. But I like the idea of iterative. I like the idea of quick action and then get data back, because otherwise I think you take all the risk.
Large part of it. Vendors are almost always, or whoever's selling an offering is really kind of at the highest risk part of new acquisition. It's always going to be the case here. The buyer is always going to be the one in kind of that power seat in most cases, and the vendor is always going to be the one passively trying to retain that contract, trying to build on it, trying to make everyone happy, which in a lot of cases leads into a lot of scope creep and just general issues.
One message that we use and you probably use is, you don't want, Mr. Client, you don't want to be in an unequal risk relationship. That drives more failure. It's more psychologically comfort for you, but it actually doesn't drive good outcomes.
Yeah.
You need shared risk, shared investment, shared understanding, and that lowers risk.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Yeah. So let's begin to bring, a key point that you might want us to walk away with, right? As all this change is going on and you're being successful managing by the way, how many people do you have that work for you across the globe?
Across the teams within PS is about 15.
Yeah. All right. So it's the size where you know what's going on,
yep.
Right? Yeah. So just as you kind of bring us to a summary, what would you like everyone to take away from y'all's ability or the ability to be successful in this risk change world?
Excellent question. One, so there's going to be three things. One is going to be continuity throughout. You have to be aligned with the client from the very beginning. So getting stuck in early on throughout the process. Two, you have to focus on building strong relationships. It's the easiest thing to talk about, but it has the biggest payoff. Okay, strong relationships, bond building. And three, you have to be proactively planning. If you are reactively planning throughout a project, risk will always exist. Proactiveness, looking at what the finish line might look like and establishing a path, how you are going to get there, working with the client, with their project teams directly, coming in kind of a huddle in a shared workspace and establishing what obstacles you may run into, a path to tackle them, and then how you're going to get to that finish line as quickly, one, for the client to be able to establish that ROI, and two, as comfortably as possible. Okay, so continuity, relationship building, strong alignment, proactive risk planning with the client teams.
Well, I think it's great.
Oh, yeah.
Very excellent. So thanks so much. And we'll be having you back to talk about this some more.
Sounds good. All right, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
I thought he had a good pulse on, and it may be because he's so close to it, it's a smaller group, but a good pulse on the changes on the way people buy and the pressure on the implementation.
I think so too. Yeah, I think he spoke about that very clearly. It's similar. We've had a couple of clients that have gone through a similar stage that he and his team are at right now, and he talked about some of the reasons why. But I think we all kind of have our own assumptions around some of that kind of stuff. But it's, look, more and more risk is being placed on the vendors or the suppliers of these technologies, and therefore, when you don't know a client very well, there's just inherent risk, right? There's just all sorts of things that you can't manage and plan for. And so because of that and because of some of the financials associated with it, there's this emphasis right now on churn management and customer retention, and our PS teams are being sucked over into that world to play that de facto managed service role because it financially looks more beneficial for the organization, and it stays out of the new customer acquisition requirement of I constantly have to grow to fill the hole in the bottom of the boat, right?
Yeah, no, and I think that particularly if we're trying to rush the implementation, mm-hmm. which we are, and even iterative, which is a great idea, those customers are not going to be using that when we say they're done.
Yeah.
So we've moved implementation and or adoption or true value after the implementation now. And that's got to be what's forcing this, a leakage of hours, but, stopping the leakage of customers leaving. And, the rev rec on that's going to be interesting as companies deal with that, because a lot of companies, a generation ago decided that all that money had to come off the product profitability and be allocated to PS so that you had proper audited financials. Yeah. Now, there's nobody who wants to do that in the product company.
Yeah, so a peek behind the curtain a little bit. We spend all day together when we do these, and we work on a whole bunch of different things. And it's early still, and this might be the fourth or fifth time that RevRec and professional services has come up.
It's a theme for the day.
It is a theme that keeps presenting itself, but it's the shift in the professional service delivery model and all this stuff that there's going to be lots of implications to it that some organizations haven't considered. So.
No, and it was great to have him, and we'd like to have him again. But the thought that we didn't get to ask, because you don't have time to ask everything you'd want, is almost 90% of the time the people who run these companies don't understand PS or PS RevRec.
Right.
And so they're more about churn than anything else, or new accounts. So PS is, often doesn't have a voice at at the strategic table.
Yep. I think that's a point we should explore more deeply. Is that whole concept of adoption is being pushed onto the customer success or some other teams, but the experts at that remain the professional services resources, especially once it becomes the uniqueness and the customization. He talked continuity from the beginning of the relationship all the way to the end of it. PS sitting right there in the middle of it. They're going to have to keep having that, and you need a model and a framework to at least attribute the right costs to the right direction, so that you're not blind to it, or and manage resource capacity utilization.
Right.
So forth.
It's going to be interesting to see how it comes out over the next couple of years.